Welcome everyone, and to this concluding event of the academic year. We're after the official close of the semester, but we would be remiss not to host a special event hearing from our Widzinski, or inaugural Widzinski Fellows. And so I will introduce them, introduce the fellowship. My name is Widzinski. I'm the William H. Sewell Jr. Collegiate Professor of Sociology and the Director of the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies. And I'm extremely pleased to have this concluding event with this specific program with those two outstanding fellows. Before introducing them, I want to give you information about an important event for next semester, so please save the date. On September 19th, Thursday, September 19th at Michigan Union, we will be hosting Rafał Trzaskowski, who is mayor of Warsaw and was a close second to the presidency a few years ago and is poised to win, who knows, is a presidential hopeful, let's say it this way. So it will be an opportunity to actually potentially meet the future president of Poland while we can still have him in Ann Arbor. So we invite you cordially to that event that will be at the Michigan Union on September 19th, and more information will be forthcoming. So before introducing our speakers, also I'd like to express our gratitude and welcome our special guest, Diane Widzinski, in whose name this fellowship was established a year ago. Diane grew up in Hamtramck. Most of us know this place as the longtime center of Polish culture in Metro Detroit. She grew up in a family that was deeply integrated into the local Polish community, and Diane's father, Leon Widzinski, was committed to passing on Polish culture to his children. He was also a firm believer in education, and he championed his daughter's goals and ambitions. And those lessons led Diane to a 20-year career as a performance hall manager at the University of Michigan's School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and she managed there the front of the house operations at Hill Auditorium, the Power Center for the Performing Arts, the Lydia Mendelsohn Theater, Rackham Auditorium, and the Arthur Miller Theater. A very busy person who's had the chance also to witness a lot of amazing art productions. And thanks to Diane's generous gift, the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies established a Diane Widzinski Visiting Fellowship for Polish scholars, artists, journalists, and public figures who come to Ann Arbor to conduct research and share their research on contemporary Polish society and politics. To the University of Michigan community, but also to the Ann Arbor Polonia and to the greater Detroit Polish and Eastern European community. And this year we had the pleasure to host 3 inaugural fellows this winter. So we had one outstanding PhD student from Jagiellonian University, Jowita Baran, who was doing research on the way that people express their political and ideological beliefs through clothing. So she was researching both far right but also left-wing ideological political belongings through clothing. And Jowita was here for almost 2 months, returned before we could host an event. And 2 senior scholars who are here today with us to present their research. I will start with Eva Klekot, who is a cultural anthropologist, translator, and curator, who's currently assistant professor at the University of Social Sciences and Humanities Design Institute in Warsaw. Her current research focuses on manufacturing and related skills, as well as on manufacturing traditions versus what is called intangible heritage. She also studies folk art and heritage making through monuments and museum exhibits. She's a member of the City of Warsaw's Council for Intangible Heritage, and she serves also on the city's Council for Monuments Preservation. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you for the introduction.
Our second speaker is Małgorzata Łukianow, who is Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of Warsaw and at the Center for Research on Social Memory. Prior to joining UW, she held an appointment at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Her work is at the intersection of cultural sociology, the sociology of knowledge, and memory studies. She's the author of a monograph on personal documents from the pandemic entitled Pamiętniki Pandemii, which was published by Krytyka Polityczna in 2022. And she's co-editor of the volume No Neighbor's Land in Post-War Europe, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan, also in 2022. In addition to her scholarship and teaching, she serves as co-chair of the Polish section of the International Association of Memory Studies. So we're very pleased, honored that you're here, and we can't wait to hear about your research and also perhaps in the Q&A about your time at Michigan. So please join me in welcoming our two fellows, Eva Klekot and Małgorzata Łukianow.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity also to present my research during this event. Today I will be talking about my interest in one of the interesting repercussions of Russia's aggression against Ukraine in February 2022. So apart from the disaster that is happening in Ukraine for millions of displaced Ukrainians, it also triggered reactions towards monuments still present in various post-communist and post-socialist countries, which were also mirror-like in many of these states. And I will focus on Poland, mostly on the monuments of the gratitude to the Soviet army and the discussions surrounding them. And being able to conduct my research here, I was trying to answer questions like who are the actors, stakeholders involved in those discussions of the Russian/Soviet, perhaps/communist heritage. So are they locals? Are they state actors? Are they representatives of the ministries, the Institute of National Remembrance? Are they experts involved in this discussion? So who's talking, who's participating, and actually to what extent, in fact, these discussions are related to Russia's aggression on Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Is it a comfortable pretext for a different type of action, or is it really deeply embedded in understanding this situation? And what is actually the heritage I analyze? So first probably should come the question, is there such a thing as post-Soviet heritage in Poland at all? So throughout my research over time, be it memories of the wartime, be it memories of the post-war attitudes towards Soviet heritage or Tsarist imperialist heritage, it's clear that Soviet equals Russian. There is actually no discussion whatsoever pointing out that actually the Soviet Union was not a nation state in this case. And it really frames the discussion in the frames of nations, which will come with a little bit of trouble that I will talk a bit about later. Another attitude is that anything in the sphere of commemoration that happened between 1945 and 1989 would be the post-Soviet heritage, because this echoes this political agenda that of double occupation, the two occupation present not only in Poland but in other countries of East Central Europe, that says that first was the Nazi German occupation from 1939 to 44-45, and then with 44-45 until 1989 started another occupation by the Soviet Union. So all the power was coming from the outside. However, trying to follow Laura Jane Smith claimed that there is no such thing as heritage. Nothing becomes heritage per se just because it's an old or valuable object. It requires a certain discourse, a certain consensus perhaps, or perhaps somehow imposed idea that something is to become a heritage. What I am also not including in my research are cemeteries. The war cemeteries all over Poland, they are under a little bit different jurisdiction and legal acts. They are governed by different laws, so I will keep them separate from it, which doesn't mean they don't hold this propaganda value with this big obelisk and big tanks and that, but just let's keep them separate for a moment. What I also find interesting is certain affordances of this heritage. So can we discuss its meaning? What kind of meanings it can accommodate, what stories it can tell, and what comes easier when it comes to uses of this heritage. And as I mentioned, mostly there are these days monuments to the gratitude to the Red Army, which is deeply embedded in one of the Polish biggest symbolic wars related to the picking sites, if you could say, during the war and afterwards. So this is a long story. I will try to keep it really short, and we'll be happy to answer questions. So 1939, when the Soviet Union attacked Poland, or the diplomatic relations were suspended. However, 1941, with German invasion on the Soviet Union, they were re-established in 1941, forming, based on Sikorski-Majski Treaty, the Polish armed forces in the east under the command of General Władysław Anders, recruiting soldiers mostly from prisoners of war and Siberian deportees at the time. Just to keep short, this army was then dispatched to the British-controlled territories through Palestine and later fighting the War of Liberation of Italy. 1944 comes another military formation under the command of General Zygmunt Berling, so Berling's army in short, also recruiting from Siberian deportees and other prisoners of war still being there in the Soviet Union. This army, under the Soviet command, went westwards to the Belarusian front and liberating territories of Poland, or liberating. This is also another discussion. This is the exhibition from the Sibir Memorial Museum in Białystok, and what is interesting also in terms of nationalization of the past, because so far it was an antagonistic memory of the right or the wrong side of this battle. But what you see, this exhibition is called A Path with No Exit, and you can see they're mirror-like. I spoke with people who are responsible for curating this exhibition, and they said it was done absolutely on purpose for them to be almost identical in terms of items displayed at this exhibition, at terms how the story was told, not differentiating, not telling which side was good and which side was actually bad, because what here is the umbrella is the fate of Siberian prisoners, Siberian deportees, and not the side of the conflict. So trying to make it a little more agonizing in terms of making it more local, more vernacular, and at the same time nationalizing this memory at the common fate of the experience of the Polish soldier during the World War II. And this is how I'm trying to look at the very broadly understood Russian past in this case, whether it's agonizing or antagonizing in this sense. So shortly about activism. So I think it's not enough to say that there is some sort of state versus something activist, even though in populist memory regimes such as those commonly present in the East Central Europe, it's not enough to say there is state and the rest, as well as talking about only instrumental and implicitly rationalist actors who are entering the sphere of commemoration for the sake of gaining political capital. What if we talk about maybe some self-appointed and less instrumental missionaries, as Polak calls them, of historical truth, who are devoted to revealing the moral history, or perhaps, as Kaplanski writes about it, who mediate between different levels of social discourse, be it top-down political discourse or grassroots levels. And also what is interesting is Jenny Fürstenberg work, and she looks at how within the state and the civic sphere, how the actors can jointly construct a framework that are a legitimate memorialization about the past. So now I would like to talk. I will be talking about 3 case studies out of 10 that I worked in. It will be Głubczyce in southwest Poland, it will be Olsztyn, and it will be Radom from the Mazovian area. Głubczyce are very particular because they really triggered international attentions. As you can see, Głubczyce are located in the Opola area at the border with the Czech Republic, and this is the very monument that was present until May 5th, 2022. On May 5th, 2022, the Institute of National Remembrance, acting on the base of the law about the communization, decided to remove 4 monuments from the public sphere, one of them being Głubczyce. It was streamed online, there's still a video on YouTube, it almost in like a public execution when the camera was looking only at the monuments. You will not see the audience, you will not see people participating, speeches, and then a very detailed zoom on how it was taken down. Interestingly, the plinth is the 19th century old German plinth, because this territory was annexed to Poland only after 1945, so you can see how many layers are embedded in this on this monument. And here is the obelisk with a soldier on top of it. I think it's also interesting to look at the speech of Karol Nawrocki, the president of the Institute of National Remembrance, and what he said. So first is that this monument is the symbol of the system that colonized half of Europe after 1945. He also spoke about enslavement. He also talked about colonization, very often referring to down with the communists, so the famous chant from the late 1980s. And comes another discussion. So this is not a monument, it is an object. And many of the discussions I will be referring to are actually about, is this actually a monument? So it's really, I think, particular that you don't see the other side of the discussion, like people participating in this really big event. It was aimed to be. I looked at the local forums, discussion, comments, press communication. Nothing much really about this monument. However, it triggered the reaction from Kremlin, actually, because there is a legislation passed in 2020 in the Russian Federation to protect monuments all over Europe that are to the Soviet army, and whenever the one's taken down, Russia will take the legal action against the institution or the person for removing it. And it was actually done. I'm not sure how this law is going to be really executed, but it did. My next example is Olsztyn. I think really in terms of affordance, it's a very interesting case, how it failed to change its meaning. So can you really kind of enhance its meaning, or maybe make a different understanding? And talking about whether it's Polish or not, I put it on purpose, because again, this is the territory of Warmia in the Warmia-Mazuria Voivodeship before 1945, also being the part of the East Prussia annexed to Poland in 1945, with the struggle about identity of the place and making yourself local in a foreign environment. This is the monument that was designed by Ksawery Dunikowski, a professor of the Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow, then imprisoned in Auschwitz during the wartime, and then responsible for this monument. It also has a very nice local name, the Gallows, which I think really nicely illustrates the attitude towards this object, and it also became a very a cornerstone for a discussion. Could this be is it actually a Polish national heritage in this case, in the territory that was a post-migration territory designed in a style that Piotr Gliński, the Minister of Culture and National Heritage at the time, deemed that it's a foreign heritage, because social realism representing communism is not the Polish national heritage, that it is not. Robert Trabach is the professor of history at the Polish Academy of Sciences, being native to Olsztyn, by the way. He decided to make a public appeal to protect the monument, entitled "The Time of Revolutionary Madness Has Passed." They selected quotes, and he asked, can we afford to clean up history and reduce it to a banal black and white picture? No. So he proposed for this monument of Ksawery Duńkowski to become a living memorial to war and violence. So going outside the box of the national history, but trying to convey a broader understanding. He listed eight points that could be included in this memorial, and long story short, this didn't work in many ways. So there were polls among locals who did not want this to become a memorial to war and violence. It was also that the voivode of Warmia and Mazuria area appealed to the Supreme Court, to the National Administrative Court, to stop this monument from being removed from the list of monuments and thus removed from the public space. The court kept the ruling of Minister of Culture. This was late September 2023. The monument is still there. Nothing happened after that, at least I'm not aware to. So I'm looking forward to see what will happen to this. And finally, Radom. As you can see, there are three elements of this memorial. So first is the classic obelisk with the red star, then this figure representing brothers in arms, and there in the back, because it's an Orthodox cemetery, an Orthodox cross representing the place. Like this is an Orthodox cemetery, and that was an action by an individual who decided to protest against Russia's invasion in Ukraine and to spray the red paint on these two elements. There are many actions like this carried on individually or by different groups, but this one I think is particular because it was taken to the court. So Mr. Wiosna, who did this and didn't really kept it a secret, was charged with destroying the listed monument. However, it's a very interesting ruling of the court. If you see here that actually he's not guilty because what he destroyed is not an actual monument. And more interestingly, if you look here, because it's allegedly to commemorate the liberation of Radom from Fasten, this is historically not true. So going even further to this, to my knowledge, this still looks like this, and also in regard to other similar actions, no one was sentenced to prison or to pay a fine for their actions. So to conclude, no laws regarding heritage management were changed. No bigger monuments were dismantled. So is it really actually about heritage policies, or perhaps how do we participate in the public discourse? Because you have this nationalized discourse of Poland against something, but I think we started with discussing how it triggered reactions during Russia's invasion on Ukraine, which are almost invisible in this case. And I think this really shows how this antagonizing nationally framed memories really limits space so much for discussing how can we broaden the understanding of war and conflict, not limiting it to the national history. Thank you very much.
Swapping places.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Diane Widzinski, who is present here, and who made it possible for a Polish scholar to profit from the resources provided by one of the best American academic institutions. And then I would like to thank to the magnificent team of the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies and to its director, Professor Brzycki, because it's all of you who made the Widzinski Fellowship Program come true and me speak to you today. So thank you. And I would like to ask the audience to imagine that we are now changing the focus of our camera, and we are going to talk about memory and politics, but on a very micro level of politics of memory. That porcelain remembers, you will get to know at an early stage of learning to use this unforgiving material in manufacturing. A cast freshly out of the mold preserves the traces of every touch. If you press the wall of a vessel and bend it while taking it out of the cast, even if you immediately straighten and smooth it out, the porcelain will remember. During glossed firing, the second firing in the temperature above 1200 degrees Celsius or 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, the wall will bend again and the form will be crooked or cracked. Worse yet, it can also warp so terribly that it will lose balance and stick to its neighbor, fall off the support, or tip over while the hot porcelain is settling. Sometimes, while unloading the trolleys coming out of the glossed kiln, the workers see shapes that no designer would have invented. The memory of porcelain wins over the human ingenuity. And this is the form that actually came once of the glossed kiln in Chmielów porcelain factory in Poland. On the February 13th, 2024, the same day and almost the same hour I boarded a plane to Detroit on my way to Ann Arbor, an official receiver entered the premises of porcelain tableware factory Karolina in Jaworzyna Śląska, Poland. Karolina, having succumbed to a dramatic rise of electricity prices, was by no means the first porcelain manufacturer in Poland put into liquidation in recent years and decades. Only a year before, in 2023, a porcelain factory Krzysztof in Wałbrzych closed after almost 200 years of operation. Its younger and much bigger branch, the porcelain factory Książ, also in Wałbrzych, was finally demolished a decade earlier, surrendering to harsh conditions of Polish economic transformation. When ceramist Monika Patuszyńska entered the premises of a derelict plant, not only was she moved by their desolation and emptiness, but also shocked that the only presence she noticed were molds. As a designer, she said, I have always been convinced that molds are the core, the most precious what a factory owns. They are the memory of forms you design. Without the molds, a ceramic factory can't exist. And here, in this empty shell of a factory that broke, I realized the plaster molds, are the only thing that stayed, the only thing left behind, useless to the scrap buyers and looters. End of quotation. She decided to revive the memory of forms and make casts out of the molds once again. One mold can yield 30 to 50 casts, depending on the design. It gets worn down because the water contained in porcelain slurry used for casting gradually washes out the plaster. Thus, the factory always needs new molds, which are incessantly produced, dried and stored anywhere they can be placed. In a porcelain factory, the plaster is just as important as the ingredients of porcelain. A plaster mold absorbs water contained in the porcelain slurry, while a fine layer of porcelain adheres to its sides. Then, the liquid porcelain takes the shape of the plaster mold's interior, and once it dries, can be taken out of it very gently. There wouldn't be porcelain tableware without plaster molds. In a derelict factory, the molds were slowly decomposing. Plaster was washed out by leaking rainwater. Repetitive cycles of frost and thaw opened the cracks. Monika used the damaged molds accessing to yet another level of form memory. Quotation. The past sediments in unpredictable ways and according to material trajectories that are beyond and unrelated to human control and intervention. A Norwegian archaeologist and material culture theoretician Bjørnar Olsen has written. This present past constitutes a reservoir for different memories and mnemonic practices. End of quotation. Monika Patuszyńska project can be seen as one of them. Currently, Chmielów is the oldest operating porcelain manufacturer in Poland, a household name for the majority of Polish customers. It was in Chmielów where I led a long-term anthropological research of industrial porcelain manufacturing. According to the principles of Frederick Taylor's scientific management, the crew of a modern production plant has been conceptualized as the factory's body, while the management as its mind. Grounded in the modern dualistic concept of human being, the metaphor not only did convey social hierarchy and power relation of industrial production, but also the hierarchy of memory and knowledge. Logocentric memory and knowledge, mastered and exercised by the mind, dominated over the embodied knowledge and memory, which French philosopher Henri Bergson, Taylor's contemporary, called habit memory. Nowadays, it is mostly called procedural memory. It is the kind of memory which can hardly be abstracted from the body into words. Think of riding a bike. All of us, we have this kind of memory. Try to recall how you rode your bike yesterday. Can you put it into words in the way that will correspond to what you remember? No, but it's enough to mount a bike again, and the memory is there. You know how to ride a bike. So this is this kind of memory, that we are not able to explain it in words, but we know how to make it, know-how memory, we would say. And this kind of memory is crucial for manufacturing, porcelain manufacturing included. Ethnographic observation allows close-ups, facilitating better understanding of this memory. The female glazer, facing the basin containing glaze, with the vessels on her left side, grasps a dish with her right hand, only slightly turning her body to the left, with her legs firm and stable in front of the basin. She grasps the dish with her hand fully open and fingers broadly stretched, but touching the porcelain only with the fingertips. It is a very light but firm and safe grip. Then the hand turns up, while the movement of the arm makes it travel above the basin. Now the dish is lying on the hand's palm at an angle of approximately 45 degrees to the surface of a shiny creamy liquid in the basin. In the next movement of the arm, the hand with the vessel dives into the glaze for a couple of seconds and emerges again with the dish safely seated on the tips of her stretched fingers. You would never guess that inside the basin depths, the hand loosens its grip for a fraction of a second, lets the dish freely plunge so that the glaze can cover the whole body. Now the arm quickly stretches to the left while the hand reaches towards a big, round, slowly rotating table and frees itself of its load with a shake. The dish softly lands and moves away to the other side of the rotating table where another worker is going to deglaze its base, as otherwise it will stick and get spoiled in the firing. In the meantime, the glazer has already grasped another dish and is about to submerge it in the glaze. Suddenly, when a batch is half done and the observer has gotten used to the sequence of the glazer's movements, there is a change. A glazed vessel has just landed on the table after a plunge, but instead of letting it go, the hand pushes it to the center of the table. It will not reach the base deglazing station. It's cracked. How does she know? It is the sound it makes while landing. In spite of all the factory noise and the radio playing loud at the killed loading station, she is able to hear the difference between the sounds of a cracked and uncracked, freshly glazed vessel makes while landing on the table. She remembers the proper sound and makes use of her embodied memory. Of this exquisite choreography, different objects form a very important part. Various tools and devices, the produce itself. The body as a matrix for habitual action is clearly decisive for habit memory, but habitual action would be impossible without things and their facilitating capacities and arrangements. Very few techniques of the body habitual actions unfold or are learned and remembered outside of an active engagement with things. Things are fundamentally involved not only as means for the action to be completed, but also in making the action and material experience familiar and predictable. Our referential involvement with things, organizing various bodily movements into relational wholes, makes us remember sequences of bodily practices when encountering one of those things, like a bike. When we encounter a bike, we know how to ride it. A quotation. Things act on us, Bergson says. Herein also lies the potential for a different kind of memory, not related to mental representations and conscious recalling. The memory of instructions for motor skills provided by the things themselves. End of quotation. The memory of affordances of things, we would say. Tool using changes the sensory motor representation of the user's body, and the neuroscientists speak of tool-induced sensory motor plasticity. Procedural memory makes use of these neural capacities. However, the industrially manufactured things are not meant to share the memory of their production with their user. From the Karl Marxist times, we have been calling this deliberate product amnesia commodity fetishism. And as we know from memory sociologist Paul Pemberton, the matter of memory not only does depend on how societies remember, but on how societies forget. Forgetting about the embodied memory and knowledge is one of modernity's foundations. The porcelain set Human Trace, manufactured during my research project in Chmielów, according to the idea of Arkadiusz Szwec, a ceramic designer, was meant to remember all the embodied knowledge and procedural memory of its clever human manufacturers. We chose tableware model produced in Chmielów for over 100 years, and Arkadiusz designed a process allowing for recording of human bodily interventions in making of the vessels. The workers on the production line were given 2 pairs of gloves, the latex ones for insulating their skin from the cobalt sulfate, and then the cotton ones for soaking in the salt solution. They performed all their procedures wearing the gloves dipped in cobalt salt. So they were leaving traces wherever their manufacturing bodies touched the porcelain body. You can see that the cobalt salt solution is pink, and only after the gloss firing the marks become dark blue, as you have seen in the previous slide. We made an exhibition of the project in the factory, and everybody in the production could see it, and some of the workers shared their opinions with me. The majority of them didn't like the vessels and said they were stained. This is because they have been socialized to the aesthetics of the factory-made Marxist fetish, not to the middle-class aesthetics of the handmade that fetishizes the trace of human touch. But you see in the slide a lady that is proudly presenting herself in front of a picture of herself. It's one of the best casters, and she was very enthusiastic about the project since the beginning, and she supported the idea. So she really wanted to be included in the documentation and wanted to show that she understands the idea behind staining the vessels. Her name is Dorota, and I think that she was really a very important person for the project to come through. The 2 works on porcelain production and memory entered into a dialogue in an exhibition I had the opportunity to curate in Kraków in Ethnographic Museum. As you can see, we chose the title that is a play of words, Maculateness, because the memory is rarely immaculate. And both of the projects speak of memory which has been neglected in consequence of the body-mind dichotomy and undervalued because they can hardly speak out themselves, those memories. Thank you very much.
So we have time for discussion. That's yours. Any questions, comments?
A question.
Yes, there's one, and then you're second. So,
For Dr. Łukianow, I'm just wondering if you had a chance to look for parallels in what is happening in the U.S. with the monuments discussion, what your research was doing. Have you had a chance to visit any of the memorials, war memorials, and so forth?
Thank you for this question. I know the discussions, and I think I didn't see them like in person. I was looking at discussions about removing monuments or keeping them with changed meaning, or maybe making an additional information on the monument to explain certain things. But I think it's even broader than this. So I think what needs to be conceptualized further is a certain how geopolitical shifts or shifts in thinking result in actions towards heritage, which would happen here in the US, they would happen in Europe, they would happen on any other continent, I think. But I think still we lack certain concepts to grasp it more broadly. My colleague from Estonia called it monument panics, that at some point we go to monuments and exercise certain actions on them whenever something changes. And this is how I'm trying also to look at it, like not as a singular phenomenon in this country or other country, in Poland, or even in the region of East Central Europe, I would say. But this is like, I think, a deeper social phenomenon that is going in that we can document as well.
if I may add to this, so it's interesting that in the case, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine prompts people to react to specific forms of commemorations of the liberation of Poland by the Soviets. Same thing happened with Black Lives Matter. Here, you had a whole series of attempts to remove Southern monuments that had an impact also in Poland, a lot in France and Britain, for example, to decolonize.
Yes.
So you have like some events occurring in one place, and then that creates this kind of snowball effect in other ones, but within national debates.
Yes, so many of these discussions are confined to national debate. However, this argument about decolonization of the public space, so after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this of course comes as well from Ukraine to decolonize the space, bringing up the question whether the post-Soviet space is also a post-colonial space, which means that so far we looked at it in the framework of the post-totalitarian framework, meaning that one system collapsed and then we start from scratch and build a different one, like a democratic one. Post-colonial means we are slowly moving out from various forms of dependency in many ways. So this shift to post-colonial thinking in this case looks at more, I would say, long-standing processes in this case.
But if I may, on this, after '89, a lot of these monuments were removed and placed into the memorial parks. And then there is IPN also issued that game, Klekot, which sort of memorializes the experience of people buying stuff. So they are all sort of in the general conscience and shouldn't be expunged or removed. I think there is certain need for maintaining some of that history, even though this is not in the sort of front and center.
You're very right to say that many of them have been already removed many years ago. So those especially commemorating, for example, Felix Dzierżyński in the center of Warsaw. So this kind of statues were taken down already in 1989. The streets were renamed, and many things were removed from school curricula, from education, from the public memory. So this decommunization has been already done in many ways, and I think it's interesting why these monuments, and my answer would be because they are there, because the communization was mostly focused on the vision of the past and future in politics. Monuments were not exactly in the center of these politics, especially not the small ones, but they stayed somehow. So not all of them are in prominent places, not all of them are in good conditions, but they are there, so they stayed. And I think this is why also they trigger so much attention.
Marisha.
It's for Eva. I just wondered about the fate of these porcelain factories. Did the Polish government step in to save any of them? And do they all have, in the towns where they exist, is there a museum that traces the history of the creations that were made there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Chmielów factory is still in operation. It's privately owned, and it's co-owned with other porcelain plants. One of them was closed 2 years ago, but still it is in operation, and it is private business. So the government, no state intervention is met for that. But before, during the transformation process, there were possibilities, and I think the most emblematic story probably is the story of the factory that Monika Patuszyńska made her project in, the factory called Książ, which was located in Wałbrzych and which was built, they started building it still with Gierek in the 70s, but opened in 1985 and was meant to be the biggest fine porcelain factory in Europe. Actually it operated for 10 years, maybe full scale or even less. And then with the transformation, it resulted that there was an enormous debt, but then there was the special economic zone created in the town of Wałbrzych. The special economic zones in the process of transformation were meant to attract foreign investments, to help the transformative processes and the industry that was in difficult financial situation to attract the investments. Wałbrzych was one of the most affected places in Poland, both because of the carbon industry and also porcelain industry. So actually, because of this special economic zone, there was a hope for the porcelain factory Książ to pay their debts. There was a very big loan on behalf of Polish Transformation Agency conceded to the factory, but the ownership procedure, the change of the ownership, was very complicated and very complex. At certain point, the factory was closing the operations step by step. At certain points, the workers themselves, they created an organization that wanted to maintain the production and wanted to buy out the factory, of course, using the loans. But actually, they were too weak in terms of political influences. They were not able to attract any investors, even in Poland, because they were workers, and because it was just after the collapse of the communism. So everything smelling at spółdzielnia cooperative was suspicious. So the only people that actually were interested in maintaining the plant in operation, which were workers, lost the battle. And in spite of this, I think it was 50 billion of, 50 million, okay, I have to dyscalculia, 50 million Polish zlotys loan conceded to the factory had to close because there was no buyer to buy it with this loan and provide the rest to cover the production. So it stayed, this 2020 picture shows that it was like staying and decaying and was looted and sold out what could be sold out. And finally it was demolished, I think, 2015. So nothing is left out of it, except of the grief. You know, this crew, it was 800 people. And it's not only very big hardship in terms of living, but also their memories, their memories, exactly. Their embodied memories were there in that factory. So talking to people in Wałbrzych is very hard. In Chmielów, I was in a very good position because the plant is operating and they wanted to talk to me about something that they were doing. And the memories of the work in a porcelain factory when the factory collapsed, in spite of the actions undertaken by the workers, it was one of the direst ethnographic experiences I ever had.
I have a brief follow-up to this question. It's about the market for these porcelains.
Yes, it is.
So,
and the price of work.
right. But the market, the Polish market for it, so is there an attempt to, for example, reinstill the desire for traditional porcelain, or like Bolesławiec you see everywhere, the tourists get it, people, well, but you see everywhere it's marketed for different markets. I mean, you go here in Ann Arbor, there's an entire store devoted to this, extremely expensive, but it has really managed to make a shift to re-signify a folk product to something like this. I'm just wondering if if there's concerted efforts by porcelain producers to kind of make it hip or change the design so that young couples want to have this instead of IKEA or Zara.
What can I say about Chmielów, because this is the factory I researched. They were dependent on Russian markets. So it's not only the electricity prices and gas prices that made it difficult for them to survive. They are still in operation, but it's hard because they lost the Russian market and they have high prices of gas. The kilns are gas-fueled. But with this hip for design, Chmielów did it. They introduced a new brand called Chmielów Design Studio. They hired the best Polish porcelain designer, Marek Cecuła, famous in the United States. I think it's really a figure. But somehow I think the processes are much more difficult to control, those processes for, fashion, hips, and so, and they are short time in results. 2 years and this is over. And if you manufacture something in a big porcelain plant, the form, the molds, the form made first, then you need the mold, then you make the mold into, it's a procedure, long procedure of manufacturing the molds and then the casts. So it's manufacturing, and again, what you said about the market. Actually, Chmielów and other Polish factories manufacture objects outside of the brands, like for other brands, outside of their own brands of Chmielów or Karolina, whatever, for other brands to sell. So they are hired because the work is still less expensive in Poland. But it is becoming more expensive and more expensive. And actually many Western porcelain producers, they quitted altogether manufacturing in Europe, and they manufacture in China or Indonesia. Even Copenhagen porcelain is making it. And as to Bolesławiec or Bunzlau, they sell themselves as folk brand, but these are three bigger manufacturers, but mean, these are not factory plants. These are really small manufacturing enterprises. And then apart from these three little bigger, like 50 people, employing 50 people, you have plenty of smaller manufacturers. So that's why they keep going. But if you have a big porcelain plant, it's a big industry.
Yuri.
Thank you so much. Thank you both speakers. My question to Dr. Łukianow. I would ask you about the slide what you mentioned, in which you mentioned the monument painted in red. I don't remember the name of the city. Yeah. So it's like show us that for some people maybe Russian aggression for Ukraine, it's like equal to memory of what happened in Soviet time. So it's like equal to Soviet. Russian equal to Soviet. What do you think about this? I just want to ask: is decommunization? Like decolonization of post-Soviet space or Soviet history is only possible by the decommunization process and related to this process actions, or decolonizing the Soviet past is also understanding that it's not equal to Russia, contemporary Russia and Russia? Just maybe your comments.
Oh, that's such a great question and such a broad question, but starting from the end, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think this is in fact important to say that Soviet doesn't equal Russian. Regardless, I think there is a consensus in Poland about about how wrong about the bad times of the communists, so to say. So you will hardly find people who are looking to it, apart from some nostalgia towards the youth and products from the past. But this is a story from my friend, and it's a sort of my personal story. But my friend's father from Ukraine, actually from Cherkasy, came to Poland to look for the grave when his grandfather was buried, and he was Ukrainian, right? So this is why it also makes this thing with cemeteries rather difficult. Also, if you watch the famous Cztery Pancerniki, the series aired on the TV for I don't know how many years right now, I think 50. Right now, you have Poles, Georgians in the army. So yes, this is very important to say. This was so much more than the Russian space, and I think Russian aggression on Ukraine was very much triggering this kind of discussion. And whether Russia's aggression on Ukraine is similar to Soviet times, this is very interesting. Who talks about this? Who talks about decolonization? I don't think I came across the popular notion that Poland needs to be decolonized from the Russian influence. I would say that right now it's mostly on the level of political discussions about Russian agents, spies, and decolonizing certain political venues, more than everyday experience of Russian elements in the past. I think in this example it's so interesting because this departed from protesting against Russia's invasion on Ukraine 2022, but nowhere in this context is lost in this discussion. So yes, there was some context from it, some pretext to it, and then we delved into the national history, which I think is very risky because this doesn't really promote understanding what is war. It just confines us to our own historical experience in Poland with the Soviets and doesn't go beyond that. So I don't know if I answered. We can continue later. This is such a broad question. Thank you very much.
I have a follow-up to that though, because the way that it could have been framed different way, right? It could have been basically reaching back to the Soviet invasion, could be a historical analogy and a warning. See what they're doing in Ukraine and what they had done to us, so therefore we need to be on our guard. But the way that this legal case and the way that IPN framed it is about decommunization. Absolutely. And it's about, right, so had IPN not existed, or had IPN been headed not by a law and justice person, the way that this would have been framed might have been very different. Because this is a very peace reading and their fight against basically decommunization of the past, and thinking of World War, of the post-war period as an illegitimate period, etc. And that's part of their ideological and political project.
Yes, the
Or is
project.
it not? I don't know.
Yes and no, I would say. So if I were to speculate, what if IPA never existed? So I think the question is that whether what happened to Polityka Historyczna, I like to use it in this way, like it's not just any politics of history, but state-enforced vision about the past. That's why I try to speak of Polityka Historyczna here. So I think the big question is whether it reinforces already existing notions or it implements something absolutely top-down. And I think it comes from both ways. So even if there was no state imposed politics about the past with this national framework, would it really be so open into other experiences about the war anyway? If you look also at politics of memory in the region, so you can see, I mean, maybe some traces of this competitive victimhood, because I think this is still an unresolved question, who was the biggest victim of World War II? And we also try to answer this question in national frameworks as well. Of course, this reinforced, I think the politics of history, the Polityka Historyczna said that actually communism ended back in 2015, not in 1989, because from 1989 to 2015 there was the post-communism, which was actually the last phase of the communism, so it only ended back in 2015. But I would say that even without these actions, it will be still, so the main framework would be the national framework.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion and very interesting and important topic. I'm talking from Ukrainian side because right now in Ukraine a lot of places are destroyed and a lot of monuments are destroyed. And my question is just your opinion, when people lose these tangible objects of memory, like if they lose their homes, what they loved, the things they loved, the monuments they saw on streets, and they don't have access to this anymore. A lot of people are displaced or refugees. What are the ways to practice this memory? Is that possible to replace that? What are these practices we can do in order to keep that memory, to preserve that memory?
So if not monument, then what? Right?
Yeah.
So there was. So I think that there was a question before about moving monuments to another place, but so there are actions like this, but no space is unlimited. You cannot put all the monuments into one place. In 2022, there was an idea to change Sulinovo, which was the former Soviet army base, into this kind of memorial park, so to say, I don't know how to name it, and put many of the statues there. However, it didn't happen because it's a very interesting thing. Because in Sulinovo, the local government wanted to make it entertaining for the guests, to attract tourists to see it, which was not accepted by the Institute of National Remembrance for a more serious martyrological memory, and they didn't agree on how this should be framed. Can you practice memory without monuments? Yes. And there is one group that was never mentioned in 2022, but they had their voice back in 1989, 2015, and onwards, which is the war veterans, who would say, this is my personal history, and this monument is a part of my biographical experience. So today, 2022, you wouldn't hear them. So there is a lot to talk about family memories, but it's also interesting. It's another story from my fieldwork coming back from 2017. So the Belling's army was the one standing on the Praga bank of Vistula, watching from a distance the Warsaw uprising and never coming to help. However, you may say they were at the Warsaw uprising, just watching it from the distance. And when I went to the western borderlands of Poland conducting some research about biographical experiences, this is how it interacts with these prosthetics of memory, how they merge and are not, as you said, they cannot be pure. That So
I would like to follow up afterwards.
yeah, so here I am knocking on the door with my voice recorder, my documents all prepared and everything, and this was the soldier of the Berlin, so I was really interested to record his experience. And here comes the girl saying, oh, you must be the Warsaw Uprising Museum, because I heard my grandfather was there at the Warsaw Uprising. And it was quite surprising, but you know, it's like different elements of the national and family past coming together, like amalgamating memory, because the memory of the Warsaw Uprising is by no means only the local memory in Warsaw, so it's I think right now becoming this canonical memory in Poland as well. So this is, I think, what will happen, that different elements will inhabit this memory, coming from popular culture, movies, other experiences, and who knows what else.
Yeah, I will follow up answering to your question with tangible objects, but portable, because then the memory becomes diasporic. And then what you need is, because you need practices of memory located in objects, or like using objects. But if you are a diasporic people, you don't have monuments. Well, you can carry your ark with you, but it's, I mean, it's what I'm observing. It is not this research that I was now referring to, but I was observing the Ukraine diaspora in Warsaw, especially in Kraków, how they preserve their memories with tangible objects that are portable, and how they practice the embodiment of their memory practicing wyszywanka. And wyszywanka, which is embroidery, but it's a very important national symbol also, because wyszywanka can be used for the icon, but it can be used for your shirt. And so there is in Kraków there is a group of Ukrainian and Polish women mostly, because the majority of people in Poland are women and children. And they gather, they organize meetings for making wyszywanka and for talking about this kind of tradition. So I would say the memory without objects, without things, I don't like the word object, without things, because things is much stronger, is very difficult, but yeah, you have portable things to build up your memory.
I would add, however, that the absence of monuments can also be very telling, and this is why you can keep, and some places do that, an empty pedestal can also tell the story of what was and how it was destroyed. Keeping ruins is also very telling. So, but absence needs to be signified, right? It needs to be marked. So you could have an empty pedestal or nothing. But if the nothingness, like an empty square, is marked as prior to this date, here was something else, then the site is filled by absence. So that's one way that different societies deal with after war.
And if I may, because also decay is also a quality of some memory. Right. So leaving something to decay, to watch it decompose, to watch it being forgotten. This is also like some point, some stance you can take in the politics of memory.
I think that it is indeed very difficult alternative what to do, because on the one hand, Soviet or Russian army, they liberated Poland. They ended this genocidal Nazi regime, which was, and on the other hand, they were oppressors for more than 40 years in Poland. So, in one hand, we would like to give them some sort of acknowledgement, and on the other hand, you don't want to celebrate them, so it is very, very difficult choice in what to do.
I will be really interested to see the discussion whether not not giving credit to the Red Army somehow for the liberating doesn't mean doesn't mean celebrating it at the same time, because maybe the experience of war is broader than this, and the experience being in the Soviet army is also bigger than this for so many nations in the Eastern Europe as well.
Okay, now. Okay, so in a minute, Magdalena, you, and then there was another hand. Okay, I'm gonna go with people who haven't spoken yet. Yes?
So thank you so much. So this is a question for Dr. Łukianow. So would you happen to know anything about Polish material heritage in Klekot, like in the Polish borderlands? Like, so obviously Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine, how that memory is preserved, if there's also any issues with the, like, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Belarusian narrative, and how that's being, if there's any issues there, would you happen to know anything about that?
Yes. So talking about colonialism, because in the case of Poland, it's somehow double-edged. Because on the one hand, it's easier to fall into the narrative of being colonized, not saying about colonizing others in a way. So this is missing from this presentation, but it's an interesting question of. So in my other work, I called it the phantom pain. And there's also this notion that perhaps right now in the other country formally, but still spiritually, it belongs somehow to us. So I would say this notion is very colonial in the sense of this bringing enlightenment to certain lands and so on and so forth. And it's very difficult. It comes as an obstacle in some discussions. I think even using the word kresy, which I'm not like a fan of that. To use this word, is also coming hard in discussions where the experience of Belarusians, of Ukrainians living in the Western Ukraine with Lithuanians as well. So yes, this is like a focal point for also a very big discussion.
Magda and Ksenia, briefly, because we finished.
So very quickly, I'm really enchanted by your two talks on very, very different topics seemingly bring together the importance of creating individual tactile memory, literally traces and imprints. And especially visible was it in Eva's presentation with porcelain and the molds and the creating of unfashionable, however, even reactionary projects that the artist you mentioned at the beginning created from książ, from the molds left in książ. But what is interesting to me between the two is how individual subjects engage in storytelling and creating imprints or resisting imprints of their individual history, individual stories. Because obviously we have forces like ICOMOS, the International Commission on Religious Sites, we have in this global bigger picture, but we also have this individual samorządy, self-governance that like to decide what shape of history we want, depending which political powers in enforcing them, right? So what's interesting to me is that empowerment of an individual to imprint, to mark, and Dorota, the person at Chmielów that Eva worked with, is a great example of this, of how we connect all the dots to a living body and a laboring body at that creates those and sort of collaborative inputs towards art and creating new materiality, new matter of memory, if you will, for those who are here and now and whose perhaps imprint the next generation. So I want to thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
I will take the second question and then you both offer your final statements. Ksenia?
I will try to be brief. Thank you for both speakers, but I have the question maybe closer to the Dr. Łukianow. You mentioned their law of the Russian Federation that provides some political and legal actions as a response for their taking out some memorable objects in other countries. So do you already see these responses and what they could be like, or they are already happening since they're as a reaction to their discourse in Poland?
I think it hit the news a few weeks ago that there were some people on the list of the Russian judiciary system to be persecuted, including the Prime Minister of Estonia and the President of the Institute of National Remembrance, and people were wondering why is he being targeted, and probably because of this law, because he's the head of the institution responsible for removal of the monuments. And thus he's facing charges for this. But I don't know about right now about further developments and how is this going to be carried forward.
Yes, thank you for the comment, Magdalena. And what I would like to add is that I see my work as also kind of decolonization, although it's decolonization of memory that is very individual and to give like place for the embodied memory is really not only to give the individual the right to speak, but it is also to point at this duality of mind and body that is really a colonizer's duality. The whole European Western colonization happened because there was the mind colonizing the bodies of the savages. So I mean, it's very strong and very brief, but this is this approach. So I see my work focused on the workers' bodies and their embodied memories as really an effort to decolonize it. And I have chosen these artists also because I feel their work is also about this decolonization. And if we want to have a better world, we have to start from decolonizing ourselves.
Well, on these wise words, I want to thank both our speakers and also Diane Widzinski for making this possible. And I also want to say that we will have a new cohort of Widzinski Fellows. Hopefully we're having another competition, and we really hope that you can help us also advertising, so to your students, to your colleagues, to your family members in Poland for winter 2025. So thank you very much, everyone.